Hey, welcome back to another video. So real quick, what I want to talk about today is the issue of when people say to me, well, it's in a book, it's in the Bible, it must have really happened because, you know, we have it in a book. It's like, would Christians really look at the Quran, with the holy book of Islam, and say because it's in a book, it must be true? I mean, if you apply that same thought process, that same rationale, how can you say that? Because we have the New Testament Gospels, because the four Gospels mention the life of Jesus Christ, or the alleged life of Jesus Christ, that means that it most certainly absolutely happened? Because we'll say, well, they must have been writing about something. Has anyone ever heard of propaganda? I mean, have we, you know, like I mentioned in the other video, the New Testament Gospels weren't written until about 40 years after the crucifixion. Why weren't they written closer? I mean, I think they were written to kind of bolster Christians' claims. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus Christ couldn't have existed, because he certainly very well could have. But I think that we're not dealing with a historical record when we look in there. You say, well, what are we dealing with? I think we're just dealing with somebody's basic story that they wanted to drum up and to provide credibility. So, back to the topic at hand, which, there I go, I lost my train of thought, was what? What was I going to talk about? I was going to talk about the, give me a second, it'll come back to me. Because it's in a book. So you got the Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a story that I have that I'll share with you real quick. So my wife has a friend, and she's a Jehovah's Witness, and she sat down one time and was talking with them, and they were talking to her about the Archangel Michael, and how, I forget whether, the Archangel Michael is really Jesus, or something like that. I don't know, something along that. And my wife was like, well, really? I mean, how do you know that? And she's like, they're like, oh, well, because it's in this book right here. So it's the same kind of idea, that because something appears in the Jehovah's Witnesses book, that makes it true? Because something appears in the New Testament Bible, and, you know, Paul writes about it, or you know, the New Testament, the Gospel writers write about it, that makes it true. So because somebody puts something in a book, it means it's true. Well, I mean, clearly, one does have to beg the question here, what was Paul doing writing all this stuff? Well, he's starting a religion. What the hell was Muhammad doing in a cave starting the Muslim religion? I mean, he says an angel came to him in a cave and gave him this information. Paul says Jesus came to him and gave him this information. Of course, when anyone says that, you can't, well, you weren't there, so you don't know. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. We just don't know. So how do you can't really say Paul didn't really have the experience that he did on the road to Damascus. We weren't there. So we have to say, well, something must have happened in the early Palestine, in the early 1st, 2nd century, because, I mean, people were writing about it. Yeah, the only people that were writing about it, that gave two craps about it, were the Christians. The people that were writing propaganda, the ones that were, you know, they're writing their history. They're writing this stuff for themselves, because they're the only ones that care. You don't find any sources outside of Josephus that mention the life of Jesus. So because it's in a book, it must be true. I don't understand that logical thinking. I mean, like, again, I'll agree that, hey, they were writing something. I mean, Paul had to have a reason to write it. So one would have, is the only conclusion have to be that we have to deduce that the reason that Paul was writing this stuff was because these events actually took place, and the only reason that the gospel writers wrote the things that they wrote was because these events took place? Am I saying that they couldn't have? I'm not saying they couldn't have. I'm just saying what's more plausible here. You know, you say, well, it must be because, you know, we have these books and they exist, so therefore that means that, you know, the events that they describe must have taken place. I don't agree with that. I think there could be another explanation, and I think the explanation is basically propaganda. It's basically stuff that they needed to write to provide credibility to their religion, because nothing else existed. If you're going to start a religion, you've got to have a belief system. You've got to have theology. You've got to have all these things. I mean, the Jews already had that all in place, and Paul knew that. And he's going to speak to the Gentiles, which is why he says that Jesus told him, you know, not to go to the Jews, but go to the Gentiles, because that's just basically him saying, look, I admit that I'm not going to be able to reach these Jews because they know that I'm full of it. You know, basically that I'm starting my own new religion, and they'll never go along with the things that I'm saying because they're contrary to what the Jews believed at the time. That's my only point, was just to show that, you know, you can't believe something just because it's in a book. You know, just because there's a story about Santa Claus, or because there's a story about the Easter Bunny, and it's written in a book, that doesn't provide credibility. People say, well, you know, the credibility comes into play when, you know, we look at the fact that, you know, what they were writing about, and you know, because it was an audacious claim, no one would ever make up a story like that. You know, no, really? Why? Because it's too sensational? No one ever writes sensational stories? That doesn't mean anything. I don't buy that at all. People can say whatever the heck they want. That doesn't mean it provides them credibility. You know, and especially if you're a guy trying to start a religion, or you're an early movement trying to establish yourself as a religion, you're going to say all kinds of sensational things. So just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's true. That's my take on that. See you next time.